That's what divination does for us. It gives us yet another question that gets us closer to the center of who we are, that holds all the answers already.
Welcome to Soror Mystica, a podcast exploring life's mysteries and magic through its symbols.
I'm Mariana Lewis, an archetypal tarotist.
And I'm astrologer Cristina Farella.
And just as the Soror Mystica guided the alchemist through his holy work, we hope to be your mystic sisters in these conversations, guiding you deeper into the symbolic life. So welcome, everyone. Here we are in our third episode of Soror Mystica. And today we're talking about something that Cristina and I both love incredibly. We are talking about the marriage of tarot and astrology. And so we're also going to open our episodes with what we're reading. So, Cristina, what are you reading right now?
Hello, Mariana. Right now, I'm reading many things because we are people who have book piles. But the thing that I'm allowing into my brain space the most is a novel by Kingsley Amis. It's called The Old Devils, and I just randomly picked it up because my partner is writing a dissertation on modernist literature and poetry, and it was kind of like a sort of, I think, other text that he was going to be looking at. So I stole it. And it's very silly so far. It's just about old people in Wales sitting in a bar complaining. And I think one of the characters is based on Dylan Thomas. So I think
that's good.
It'll pick up. And then on the brain space side of things, not fiction wise, I'm reading Sophie Strand's The Flowering Wand, which is a really lovely book. And it's new. Sophie Strand is a really interesting contemporary thinker on animism and mythology. And this book actually takes an approach towards re-understanding the masculine, which
cool,
is an interesting approach because we hear so much about the feminine, rightfully so. But I really am loving her really tender approach to reconfiguring masculinity in this series of essays. So that's what's up for me.
That's on my Cristina got that for me for Christmas as well. So that is on my coming up list of reads. I am reading also. I have two. Well, I think I have 4 books going on currently because I am a constant read 50 pages, get extremely bored, move on, come back kind of a reader. So right now I am reading Joseph Campbell's Flight of the Wild Gander, which is a collection of his essays from the 60s, which are unbearably dry, which is so sad because Joseph Campbell is such a weird, snarky delight of a person. And his live lectures are just so engaging, but it's discussing the biological aspects of myth making and, many different layers of proving the idea of his seminal idea of the monomyth. And then on the fiction side, I am reading The Road by Cormac McCarthy because I just need to be cheered up right now. And so that's what I chose.
You cheer yourself up.
To make myself feel better about my life is just, post-apocalyptic trauma.
It's going to give you bad dreams.
I'm having them.
You have to.
They're already here. It's okay. So let's kind of jump into talking about tarot and astrology. So we're going to talk about how they blend together, how they marry, how they're related. But before we do that, I think we need to establish how we approach them, how we view tarot and astrology from our own particular lenses. We're both familiar. I know a bit about astrology. You know a lot about the tarot. So we kind of already have our groundings in both, but we've definitely come at our own things with a lot of knowledge and a very conscious perspective. So I thought it'd be good to sort of talk about our individual approaches to our modalities. So why don't you go first and tell us a little bit about how you experience astrology, what it means to you, and how just kind of the foundations of your approach to it.
Okay, wonderful. And I'm excited for this episode because I think that a lot of times people are trying to figure out like which divination system to use. And I think
Yeah.
it's important to say like, I want to talk about what's similar and what's radically different, of course, between these two systems because there is an interesting kind of overlap, but at bottom they are quite obviously different systems of finding a connection to something macrocosmic or something deep in the psyche.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so, yeah, like my own approach to it is really that I use astrology as a tool for, yes, like self discovery, understanding and giving language for the personality, for the psyche, for things that we don't really understand in ourselves, but are perhaps drawn out in the chart by aspects between planets and signs and their symbols. But you can also use astrology as a divination tool, just like pulling a card in the tarot.
Mm.
There are different branches of astrology that exist, and the one that is most commonly used for divination is called horary astrology, which I'm no expert in by any means, but I'm always kind of reading about and testing my ability to find lost objects or
Mhm.
locate missing pets
Yes.
or understand where or how something will be timed out. And so that's the other interesting thing about astrology that, at least as far as I am able to use the tarot, I think that astrology is a little bit better at determining timing than the tarot.
Yeah, definitely.
Because astrology, yeah, literally is like the structure of time and cycles. And so, if somebody wants to know when will I meet somebody, or when will stuff get better at work, or when will I stop feeling so shitty?
Mhm.
In my experience, in my opinion, astrology can tell you, oh, well, the eclipses are moving through your axis of career and
Mhm.
home life. That could be challenging for you for the next several months. And so that is my approach to like really what we're doing with astrology in practical terms beyond the self-discovery stuff. There is a lot of divining that goes on with this tool, but it's different kind of divination than what the tarot offers us, right? So yeah, like tell me now about your approach to your tool.
Yeah. My approach to the tarot is what I call archetypal tarot because I really do look at it. This is in my with my students. I really just make sure I differentiate our approach through divination versus individuation. And so, with an archetypal approach, which is what I teach and what I use, it's really about individuation. It's really about using it to reflect yourself back in the moment. Does that mean that divination is not a part of it? Certainly not. I mean, that's kind of the mystery of being, is that a lot of times these things will show us and our inner psyches, and then at the same time show us what's going on outside of us. They do tend to kind of mirror the inner reality and the outer one. So it's just, something that can be part of it. But yeah,
Mhm.
so I definitely take this archetypal approach where I'm curious about how the tarot was created, what archetypes really, you know, what the archetypal hearts of the cards are and what they've always been, and how we can trace that back and find the language of our human experience through the cards. So I think that what we should do is definitely kind of establish a little bit of like an objective history of each of
Mhm.
these modalities too, since we're going to talk about how they kind of work together. um, and I think that a lot of us just don't know where these things really come from. And it's kind of like a big problem because then we expect them to work for us, but we don't really have this intimate knowledge of their own, history. So I can talk a little bit about the history of the tarot and its development. Because like there's so many rumors out there about where the tarot comes from. Like there's this idea that it comes from like the Egyptian Book of the Dead. There's an idea that it comes from like the Sufi tradition, that it came from India. Like there's a whole bunch of thoughts out there about it. Um, and it's difficult because the scholarship around tarot is like not the best. We have the cards, like we have the images of the cards, and those are kept pretty well, I think. But like the actual like traditions and histories of them are not as preserved. So what we do know for sure is that the first known deck came out of the mid 15th century in northern Italy. We have no traces of a tarot deck before that. The idea of playing cards was something that came to Europe, probably from the Crusades, because why not? Let's just take everything we can. That's the European motto. But sorry to anybody who lives in Europe. I apologize. But yeah, so they did adapt that into like the that like playing cards were a thing, but then the tarot specifically, which is this deck of cards that includes these elements of the major arcana. That's kind of what defines it, like these picture elements that are not just numbered cards or court cards. So it was created in the 15th century, used as a game. I don't want to pronounce this incorrectly, but I think it's tarocchi. I think double C's, HI in Italian is.
It's a hard C.
Yeah. Okay, great. All my opera training used effectively. So tarocchi. So that was the game, and it was played in Europe, and it was also like a way for nobles to kind of show their wealth. So they would have a deck commissioned and like given to someone on a wedding day or something like that. So it was like a little fancy thing. And then it kind of fell out of popularity for a couple hundred years. And then in the 1700s, when the printing press was a little bit more available, they started printing decks. And so this is when we get the Marseille deck and the Swiss deck and the more traditional decks that we know. And so once that was printed and there was a standardized look to the deck, then it kind of came back into popularity. And then this is when all these occult thinkers started to come back. We had that Romantic period, and we had this like renaissance of occultism during that time period. And so all these people were like, oh, the tarot is full of secrets. Look at it. Like you can tell that there's mysteries here. And so then they started studying it. And then in the early 20th century, there was a little hermetic order out of England called the Order of the Golden Dawn, which just studied magic and mystery and all the things. And there was A.E. Waite, who's the creator of the Rider-Waite Tarot, was a member of this order, as was Aleister Crowley, who's the creator of the Thoth Tarot. And so this order was just like really particularly fascinated with the tarot, and they spent a lot of time studying it. And Pamela Smith, who is the illustrator of the Rider-Waite, was also in the order. And so they just created a new deck, and they said they studied it really hard, and they said this is what it should be, and they reinterpreted it, and then Rider was able to publish it widely. And so, it was already used for divination starting in like the late 1700s and early 1800s. But that's really when it like kind of kicked off this like divinatory work with the tarot, because everyone could get their hands on a deck. You could just go buy one. And it became very popular, obviously in the hippie era. It was really popular. Everyone found a deck in their mom's, bedside table or whatever. And then now we have the tarot being like one of the top forms of spiritual seeking in the 21st century. So that was my extremely long-winded review of the history of the tarot.
No, you broke it down beautifully. And I think it's really important to know the histories of the tools that we're using, because again, we've talked about this probably in the past 2 episodes. We live in a moment that's really cut off from the source of a lot of important things. And
Yeah.
it's as important as occultists or diviners or artists even, or just people trying to like know themselves, to literally know the provenance of what you're using. I think that that's something that people do understand, but because we live in such a consumer oriented and instant gratification oriented culture, I think it's kind of like, I buy the cards, I pull the cards, I feel better or I feel worse. Like there's just there's no like move to really understand the history of what's behind those images. And the tarot is just so wild, especially the Rider-Waite deck. The Rider-Waite is full of so many symbols that are like, as from Kabbalah, they're from, the Bible, different archangels, different sacred symbols of like the birds and the plants, and the yuds of like the, some of the, what is it? Like in the moon card, I think one of the aces as well.
Ace of
right?
Wands.
Yes. Right. So it's just like, it's a symbolic kind of collage that once you know the origins of those symbols and their histories, it opens up the deck even more. And that's
Yeah.
what I've loved so much about like working with and learning the tarot. I don't really care if I pull, the 5 of Wands and it's like, I'm going to tell people, what that means. I really deeply care about the colors, the position
Mm-hmm.
of the figures, etc. Because to me, it's like interpreting a painting then, which
Yeah.
is as divinatory as just pulling a
Mm-hmm.
card and being like, this is what my guidebook says.
Yeah. This is just a problem in general with any form of divination, is that when we read it, we have no flexibility with it. There's two things that come to mind. The first thing is Marie-Louise von Franz in her book Divination and Synchronicity, which is just an enormously challenging read, but really, really worth it if you want to go deep into like, how does divination work? It has such a cool perspective on things. But she says in that most forms of divination, tarot included, is chaos divination, which basically means that we're given something that doesn't have a fixed meaning and we're required to interpret it. This is interesting when we're talking about astrology too, because I think that it can actually be chaos divination and then also not, depending on how you're
Mhm.
using astrology. Because with tarot, there is no set. This is what the Two of Swords means. This is the only thing it can mean. It means something different every time you pull it, depending on the question and the person. It always has the same basic, experience, and I don't even know if you can say that with any kind of certainty, but generally we say, okay, Two of Swords, deadlock, dilemma. These are the keywords we have for it. So we know it's kind of going to be around that. But each time you pull that, for one person, it might mean now is not the time to make a choice. And for another person, it might mean get out of your head and just do the thing you already know to do. Right. So it really depends. But this idea of chaos divination means that it has to be brought through the lens of interpretation. The diviner is the key, the oracle that the diviner is kind of channeling is the key to it. And then the other thing that came to mind is that, and I'm sure you can speak to this a lot, with students who are trying to learn tarot or astrology, any modality of divination, they're so fixated on learning the meanings of things. What does it mean? What is the keyword? What is the like one to one, if I see Saturn, this is what it should mean, rather than understanding that it's about creating relationships with these things. This is my pet peeve when people are like, "There's too many cards to memorize." I'm like, "Yeah, because you're trying to memorize everything instead of
Right.
actually like knowing them
Yeah.
intimately, and like getting to every time you pull that card, that's a new meeting. It's like meeting a stranger, right? Like, or a new friend. Every time you meet them, you're going to learn a little bit more about them. You're going to understand them better."
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, I think that's so beautiful. So well put. The importance of relationship with these components. Like there's this whole thing that happens when we have a static image or a symbol. I think that's not tangible. Same thing with a planet or a sign or an aspect formation, that we think that there is a one-to-one correlation of like, this is what this is going to absolutely mean. But everything, I think, in witchcraft and in the occult and in being a sort of channel is about facilitating relationship, because that's how we really get to know all of the sides of a particular symbol. For me, something that comes to mind is Saturn.
Hmm.
And I'm a
You have
Capricorn
fought for your
ascendant.
relationship with Saturn.
Yes, I
You have fought
have.
for it. I know. I've watched you fight. You've struggled with him for so many years.
Saturn has beat my ass my entire life. And I I don't know why it took me so long to understand things about Saturn that I know now. But what I'll say is, and I'm being very cryptic. So basically, in astrology, for those who don't know what I'm talking about, Saturn is the planet that we associate with like having to grow up. Basically, he's
Yeah.
like the take responsibility, be slow, be steady, be mindful. But he gets kind of thrown in this prison of being an indicator of suffering and of hardship and of restriction. And while I did suffer during my Saturn return, for example, and I
Mhm.
did feel very restricted and I felt scared. And, all of the Saturn keywords were very big in my life at that point. I think that cultivating and coming back to that symbol again and again and really trying to see where Saturn might show up in positive manifestations, or if I do Saturn, what happens? And that's like taking responsibility. Good things happen, right, for
Mm-hmm.
your life. So anyway, I think that I'm always happy to offer alternative takes on the planets, but you
Yeah.
can only do that when you come into relationship with them
Mm-hmm.
and are not also like just seeking something from
Yeah.
the symbol. For me, I like to just like give them a glass of wine, give
Mm-hmm.
them, like some
You take good
fruit.
care of them. You're such a Virgo. Yep.
I'm just a Virgo. So, but it's important because like you wouldn't run up to a stranger on the street and be like, "Help, help, I need to fix my life right now. Come with
Mm-hmm.
me."
Mm-hmm.
Like that person's going to be like, "No, what? Who are you?" The planets are spirits. And, I think that it's very rude to ask a spirit to do something for you without
Mm-hmm.
saying, "I appreciate your gifts. Here we are." So, we've deviated a little bit, but I
I
think that
know
to
we
bring
always
it
do this.
it's okay.
We go
I'm
on
gonna bring it
wild,
back. I'm gonna
good
bring it back. I
tangents.
can do it. I can do it. So to kind of connect it back to what you were saying so well is that being in relationship with the symbols shows us that there isn't just one concrete meaning
Mm-hmm.
of the cards, of the planets, etc. And so I think that we both encourage having a dynamic, fluid relationship with our tools, which is really
Mm-hmm.
important. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think that this is a good time to talk a little bit, just briefly, about the fact that you and I, we both teach students these our techniques and the work that we've suffered to develop over the years. Because I think that we get asked a lot from beginners, like, "Oh my God, what do I do? How do I get there?" And it's like it is a slow and steady development. It happens over a long time. It just takes patience. However, it's important to have the right learning spaces, and I think that the internet is a cesspool. Just end of like period, end of sentence. It is a place that we try to get a lot of information and get very, very confused. So Christina and I have actually, we both host courses where we can kind of teach people these modalities with a lot of wisdom and groundedness and depth. And this is kind of why we're such good friends, because we value these things so much. So I have the Archetypal Tarot School, which actually just launched like a couple days ago. So that is open. So if you're interested at all in learning archetypal tarot, learning how to develop your tarot knowledge with a lot more just a lot more depth in it, then definitely check that out. There'll be a link somewhere in the show notes. And Christina, please tell us a little bit about your offering too.
Yeah, I have enrollment open. It's funny how we timed it like accidentally
We
together.
always do that. We
Yeah,
always do things at the exact same time, and we're just like, "Hey, do you know I'm doing this?" And you're like, "Oh my God, no way, me too." And we're like, "Why do we do that all the time?" It's really cute.
it's good. I think it's helpful to support each other in that
Mm-hmm.
workflow. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so my astrology kind of immersion course is called the Divine Art of Astrology, and it is a 10-week course where I'm lecturing live and really trying to teach people how to read their own charts with a kind of enriched perspective. So we go over, of course, the foundational components of the chart, the building blocks of the needle, what it means to, understand aspects, understand transits. But I also teach my own mythic vision technique, which is
Yeah.
bringing in mythic figures and archetypal resources via the asteroids. And I also include a lesson on planetary ritual and magic at the end, which is really fun. So if anyone is looking for a place to jump in and really be held, I think it's a very supportive environment. And
Mm-hmm.
I had a blast the first time teaching it last fall. So we start February 15th. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'm excited. So
Yeah.
there'll be a link in
Yeah.
the show notes about that too.
Mm-hmm. Mine starts February 20th, which we
So
also was
weird.
totally accidental. It's
Yeah.
literally the same week. I don't know why we do that. Um, but yeah, I mean, we're both biased, but we've both taken each other's courses, and I think that, I mean, I loved yours. It was ridiculously good and like thorough, but also just like enchanting. So I can't recommend it enough.
Yours is extremely powerful as well. And I think that if I didn't know you and I found your course and I was earlier on my tarot journey than I am right now, I would immediately become obsessed with you and be like, I need to know this person and absorb everything she's saying, because the way that you reframe and offer these really, really rich interpretations of things that are often quite difficult to grasp, like the court cards, for example. You just are so good at that. So yeah,
Well,
I just,
thanks. Anyway, enough tooting our own horns. It's weird to do it, but we have to sometimes just so people know things. So let's talk a little bit now, because I talked a little bit about the history of the tarot. Tell us a little bit about where astrology comes from. Tell us the history of astrology, Cristina.
Yes, because it's such a known thing. I mean, okay, so, I think that it's fascinating, to know the history of the tarot. They both have murky origins.
Yeah.
But with astrology, we have a little bit of a wider expanse of time. The first sort of astrology that we have recorded, and so that's important too, because if you think about it, I'm sure that early humans were looking at the sky, noticing patterns, observing and witnessing eclipses, being frightened by comets. Like, I'm sure that there has always been a feeling of there is something divine in the above, especially, I mean, I can't even imagine what the stars looked like thousands, bajillions of years ago, right? We have such a distorted perspective of
When we had no smog.
galaxies. Yes, exactly. You have to stop reading Cormac McCarthy. No, when I
I'm
was
never gonna do
in
this.
when I was in 5th grade, our science teacher told us that when we were adults, there would be no stars visible in the sky, and I went home and cried. I was like,
Yeah.
Miss Rutherford is so mean. And so
Yeah.
I was traumatized by that completely.
I'm still waiting for New York to sink. This is the thing that they always told us.
It very well may,
Yeah.
but
Oh my
okay,
God.
so look at us not being able to stay on topic.
That
Let's
was
talk
wild.
about the history of astrology. uh, um, so anyway, right, astrology is thousands of years old. Our earliest recorded sources of astrology are from very distant, faraway Babylon. So
Yeah.
around 2000 BCE, we have the first sort of examples of Babylonians using a combination of like sky observation and a kind of divination called haruspicy. Is that how you pronounce it? It's one of those words
I
that
don't
you
know.
read. Yeah, okay. And then you don't say it to anybody. It's divination via like animal organs, like via the liver. So this was like the
Oh.
first, right,
Okay, gotcha.
yeah, combo divination. But this is the earliest recorded form of astrology that we have. And so, like, cultures around the world beyond Babylon, ancient cultures 3,000 years ago in China, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, they were all practicing some form of divinatory astrology. But the first recorded natal chart, which is like the birth chart, was found in Babylon, in Babylonian cuneiform, around the 5th century BCE. So that's like the most distant reach that we can possibly scoop up and say this is
Right.
historical. And Babylonian astrologers used the 5 traditional planets, so Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, as well as the luminaries, the sun and the moon, and the fixed stars to sort of create this like matrix of, spiritual divine influence. And then as people traveled and as cultures invaded one another and as culture developed, we have this kind of spread of the astrological. And so it starts in this more sort of like Mediterranean space. But by, the Hellenistic era, we see, astrology spreading the cosmology of the time, which was Aristotelian. And it was taught widely at universities, right? So there is this era of like just a big boom in the Hellenistic period, which was like 150 BCE to 625 CE. And then astrology continues to be popular into the medieval period, into the Renaissance. We have a huge explosion of astrology texts due to the invention of the printing press in the medieval era. And so, the Copernican or heliocentric vision of the universe is something that is widely accepted in the medieval era by, the Renaissance and then into the Enlightenment period. Astrology gets forced underground due to the Enlightenment, but it still exists. And, weirdly enough, there's just this very big boom of astrology in the 60s and 70s here in the US. But, that's the kind of rich history that we're working out of with astrology. And really in the 90s, as far as I understand, this is when people in the astrology community that we still have today started reaching back into the past and trying to translate old texts and revive these
Yeah.
ancient sort of Hellenistic techniques and traditions. So, all of this to say, astrology has many different forms. I didn't even touch on the spread of astrology into like India, where we have the
Mm-hmm.
Vedic tradition. So, it's hard to encapsulate everything. I don't mean for this to be a comprehensive history, but just to give
I have
you
to
a
take
sense.
your
Yeah.
course for that.
Take the course. Yeah. Yeah. We go into it. So, this is,
Yeah.
this is what's here. So, right, we've got two different styles of divining, but there is a lot of overlap between the two of them. And I think that this
Yeah.
is what excites people and also confuses people, because we can't
Yeah.
make a one-to-one correlation between the Lovers
Mm-mm.
card and Gemini, for example. But, there is a valence of connection between maybe a card and an archetype of the zodiac. So I'd love to know like where you see that, where you feel into these connections and how they marry. It's the title of our episode.
Yes. Now that we have our foundations in tarot and astrology, the question of like how they blend together, how they can be used together is so tricksy, because a lot of people, it sounds like to me, a lot of people have this they think that there is this one-to-one correspondence, like this card connects to that planet or that sign or something, and that this is like the established knowledge. I think that because a lot of times people will ask me weird questions like, well, what card does that, or what planet does that connect to? And I just, I want to clarify that there is no one-to-one associations between tarot and astrology, partly because they were not like conceived at the same time, and they were not like, the tarot was not built upon astrology directly. But I think that there's just a lot of different people who have a lot of different perspectives. So in Karen Homaker Zondag's book Tarot as a Way of Life, it's a really great book. It's like just a general tarot guidebook that takes a Jungian approach. But Karen Homaker Zondag is also like a very prolific astrologer, right? I know that you use her work a lot
I love
in
her.
your
Yeah.
study. Yeah. And so she has this chapter in this book that's literally just about tarot and astrology. And she has this section where for each card, she looks at 7 different prominent tarot thinkers and lists the different like associations with them. So just taking that as an example, like let's look at, for example, the Hierophant card. She said this thinker Bonshoff connects it to Sun and Sagittarius. Aleister Crowley connects it to Taurus. Pappas, who is another kind of older thinker, connects it to Aries. Worth connects it to Aries. Tyrian, he's another French guy. I think Tyrian. He connects it to Leo. Like everybody just has a different association. So it is a really difficult thing to say there is a clear one-to-one. It's established. It's connected. There are certain connections, like the one that we use most fluidly is through Arthur Waite, because most of us are using the Arthur Waite system of tarot. And so, for example, he also connects the Hierophant to Taurus. And I don't totally get why. There's a lot of people who get it. I don't totally get it. There's the famous thing that Arthur Waite did is that he actually rearranged the major arcana, and it's like very controversial still. So if you didn't know, the Strength card used to be number 11 in the tarot sequence in older decks, and then Arthur Waite put it as number 8. So he switched Justice and Strength. The reason is because Strength is so obviously connected with Leo because it has a lion in it. And so he had ordered it in a certain way. And so that number 8 was going to be Leo. And so he had to flip it. And obviously Justice feels much more connected to Libra. So he just kind of flipped them around, and it just made sense to him, which I agree with. I think is great. I think it makes a lot of sense, not only for astrological reasons, but he did that. He made that choice to do that to suit, what he thought would fit really well. So this is just like the caveat I want to begin with. You know, if you're looking for like, okay, I need a chart that says this card is connected to that, you're not gonna find one that, you know, is agreed upon by everybody. Everyone has a slightly different perspective. So it is okay to make your own connections and your own associations. So I think that what we can, you know, maybe do is talk about like practically, like the practicality of using tarot and astrology together. Like how, you know, rather than thinking about let's get into the big intellectual mess of like what card should be connected to what thing in astrology. How can we even use them together? How do we marry them? And I know that you have such like gorgeous ritual work that you do with the tarot and astrology.
Yeah, I think the most easy and straightforward tool that I have that blends the two of them is to look to the correspondences between the decans of astrology and the associated pip cards. So for the uninitiated, the right, there are so many ways of dividing up the space of the zodiac. We've got the 30 degrees of each sign. We've got the planetary rulerships of each sign. We've got essential dignities in other directions via element, via gender, modality, etc. There is a way of splitting up the zodiac, which is 360 degrees of space, into these discrete 10-degree slices. So there will be 3 per sign. And each of those is going to be associated with a particular planet and a particular pip card in the tarot. And so, what I love about this particular way of blending the two modalities is that we're working with the pip cards, which to me get like so forgotten. And you make this point.
Oh, they really
Yeah,
get
I
forgotten.
love
Yeah.
you've said this before in, probably just in conversation with me, but like they make up the majority of the deck. And yet the cards that get all of the glory are the major arcana. And
Hmm.
no shade to the majors, like they're very beautiful and powerful, but we live probably in the realm of the pips, which are mundane. And
Yeah.
right.
This is something that Jung says. Actually, he like, I mean, he kind of like he has a few quotes on the tarot. One of the things he said is that like they're the symbols of transformation. The daily lived symbols of transformation are in the cards, and this is
Mm,
like, I think it's Karen Homaker Zondag actually in this book that says like while the major arcana are the archetypes of our individuation, the minor arcana is how we live it.
oh,
It's how we actually experience
you're
it.
so good.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it's great. So I mean, this is totally we cannot forget the minor arcana, and so I love this how the decans like kind of line up.
Yeah.
I'm not as good at it as like I don't know as much about it
All you
as
would
you
have to
do.
do is just think about it for 2 seconds, and like look at a chart. So this is the
I
other.
have to have 2 seconds to think
Okay.
about it.
So for each of the decans in the astrological sort of distribution, first of
Mhm.
all, there are several different systems of dividing up the decans. The decans themselves come from ancient Egypt. There's a lot of controversy in the astrology community about which system is correct. So just like every other freaking occult tool, there is dissent and disagreement about which one is the right one to use.
Everything.
It's fine. So I use this particular, it's called the Chaldean
Mhm.
distribution or division
Yeah.
of the decans.
Yeah.
And the first decan of the zodiac starts at 0 degrees Aries, which is connected to the planet Mars. So from 0 to 9 degrees of Aries, any planet that is in that position in a chart is under the influence of Mars. From 10 degrees to 19
Mhm.
degrees of Aries, that is going to be the decan or the decan of the sun in Aries. So it's a way of like finding deeper connections with these places in the zodiac to deepen our understanding of the influence of that slice of zodiacal space. But the tarot affiliations, I actually have to look into the history of this. I know that Crowley was a huge proponent
Yeah,
of
I'm sure
this.
it's somebody of the
It's one of
Golden
the
Dawn
Golden
who did
Dawn
this.
people, I
Yeah, yeah,
think,
yeah.
right?
Definitely.
So, each of the pips is associated with each of these decans. And so, for example, today, maybe we're feeling a little gloomy. It's a new moon in Aquarius, literally as we speak.
I
I
know.
think actually at this moment it's perfecting itself. And so the decan of the zodiac that we're dealing with is the first decan of Aquarius, because the lunation is happening at 1 degree Aquarius. That's the first chunk of space in this sign. And the card that's associated with that decan, it's the Five of Swords, right? So
Five of Swords is just pitiful. I feel like I'm being beaten up
mm-hmm,
by everything
mm-hmm. Yeah,
in my mind right now.
I hate that. I hate that for you. I hate that for us. But
Thank you. I
you know,
appreciate it.
to make a kind of a long point short, or to wrap up this brain thing that I'm doing, when you want to blend astrology and tarot, what I like to
Mhm.
do is literally look at the decan for the astrology of the moment. So you can do this easiest on full moons and new moons. And like make an altar for that astrological event, and use the card as a decorative tool on the altar to channel into the energy of what that
So
lunation might be
beautiful.
bringing us. So it's like simple, but it blends the two, it bridges them, and it still lets each of the systems be what they are. We're not trying to
Yeah.
smush them on top of each other and say this equals
Yeah.
this. I like to
Well,
just,
that's
yeah,
actually
merge them.
yeah, that's a really good point. I wanted to kind of bring in this quote by Karen. Um, we're on a first name basis now. So she writes, "What remains is the possibility of combining two particularly valuable methods while allowing them to speak for themselves. The very fact that they are so different allows them to complement one each other splendidly. But because of the differences in the composition of the symbols, the tarot cards can provide supplementary information where astrology is silent, while astrology can reveal connections and timing that will put the tarot reading into perspective."
Mhm.
And I think that's really the best way to marry tarot and astrology. I think you kind of have to let them be their own systems, and they just complement each other. They supplement each other.
Mhm.
So one of the things that I do, I don't really have a active practice around using both of them. I don't really have an active practice around anything. I'm like very terrible at maintaining practices, but I do really try to notice what cards come up, and like what transits are going on. So, for example, this past week, I've done like 5 readings. And all of them have had the death card in it. And like, this happens to me a lot, actually. I often will see a certain card come up a lot of times during a week or 2 week span. And I completely believe that the cards that are coming up are reflected in whatever transits are happening, because these are the things, this is what happens in astrology, is that even if it's not a personal transit, even if it's a collective transit, it will bring something out of you in some way. It'll draw up some experience within ourselves. So we actually looked this up because I told you about this. And it's like a Pluto Sun conjunction, right?
Yeah, this week we were building
Yeah.
towards the conjunction of Sun and Pluto, which only happens once a year. And like the death card, in my understanding, is actually associated with Saturn. Um,
Yeah.
but that's okay. Like the sort of vibe of death and rebirth is very much connected to Pluto as a
Right.
symbol. So that just makes sense to me that a
Yeah.
lot of your clients are feeling into that card, and maybe also like you as the diviner are, kind of bringing that forward.
Yeah,
And
there's probably
mhm.
some weird Saturn thing happening in my chart that's like activated. Who knows? But even though Pluto might not be a direct association with the death card, we know that it has this element of being about cycles of death,
Yeah,
cycles of rebirth, cycles of
absolutely.
moving into the underworld. And so I think that it makes so much sense that this is kind of what's coming up in so many of my clients. They're feeling this question of death, the death experience, the transformation through the space of the underworld. And so I think that this is one thing that we can do. Notice the cards you pull. Notice the cards that seem to have some interesting energetic, thing around them, and see how that might make sense with your transits. Look at your chart. Maybe if you pull, I'm going to have to do some crazy mental work right now, but maybe if you pull something like, I don't know, like the Six of Swords, which is a card of transitions, right? Look at what planets or things, what stuff is happening in your chart that might point to this experience of transitioning.
Mm.
Look at what specific planet it is that is is making that transition, or what it is pointing to, right? This is a way that we can use them together to really understand, well, how do I go deeper with this thing? Or if you're noticing a certain transit in your chart and you're like, well, I really don't know how to work with that, that's a really great time to pull a tarot card and see if the tarot can give you some supplemental information to guide you through that experience.
Yeah, I totally love that. And I think that's a perfect layering of it. What I do think is fun to do is look at your transits, understand, what is here. And then, like you said, we can ask the cards direct questions. Sometimes it's hard to ask the chart a direct question, but the chart shows us what's happening. And so it's like, okay, I know this is happening. How do I weather this? What's my greatest resource right now? What should I be on the lookout for with my Saturn return? Like so that's, I think, a perfect way of doing it beyond the ritual component, which, is only available every so often when we have significant astro events.
Yeah. We also have to let go of the need to make sense of it. What does it mean? What does it mean? What does it mean is the the thing we all do. And we don't know. We're not going to know. The point is not to figure it out in the moment. The point is to say, it's going to guide me somewhere else where I have to ask more questions. This is what I always say to my tarot students is, like, at the end of a reading, if you're looking for an answer, you're only going to be disappointed. You have to be anticipating yet another question that guides you closer to what you know to be the resolution. And this is always what we're doing, bouncing from question to question. What's that? The Rilke quote, live the questions now, and perhaps one distant day you'll live into the answer. That's what divination does for us. It gives us yet another question that gets us closer to the center of who we are, that holds all the answers already. So I think that one of the things that is important to bring in, maybe to kind of tie it together, is I'm a little bit on the bitter side today, if people can't tell. I'm like a little cynical today. Whatever the astro weather is, it's making me a little bit. So that side of myself has this to say, which is, we have to be wary of trying to type ourselves with these systems. I think that we have this draw to really kind of to figure out what our typological, signifiers are. Like, I am this card, or I am, I am a Scorpio rising, and this means this about me. And we get very entrenched in these ideas. And this is one of the ways that I think we want to blend tarot and astrology, is to say, I am, my card is the Lovers because I have a Gemini moon and like whatever. And it like kind of falls into these categorizations of ourselves. There's nothing wrong with that. I want to be clear. That's not like a bad thing to do. It's just sometimes it gets a little sticky when we're just trying to figure out ways of defining ourselves rather than allowing the archetypes and the experiences to reveal things about ourselves, right? I was telling you this the other day when I first started my tarot practice. Anytime I pulled the High Priestess for someone else, I'd get like really like angry because I was like, she's my card. You don't get to have her, because I had like such a just strong connection to her. Like, she was me. And, I very much connected her to like my Scorpio sun. And because even though they're not necessarily technically connected, felt very much like how Scorpio can kind of immerse in the underworld space, but then also kind of bring things to light. And that felt very High Priestess to me. So, I kind of had to consciously let go of that a little bit. Like, this is not my card and this is not my sun. Like, these are things that tie me to the collective, tie me to other people as well. And, just teach me things about myself and about others.
That's beautiful. And I completely agree with you. And I think it's a good thing to remember that just like we contain all of the signs in our chart, we can tap into all of the different cards of the tarot, and that can be really empowering. And the ability to stay flexible and mutable and pliant and open to receiving the energy, the imagery of these discrete pieces is what will make your practice feel really rich. Because when you nail yourself down to an archetype, eventually I think that archetype starts to resist you a little bit. Or
it'll kick you out of its
it's just
temple,
like you can't it's like I don't know, it's like a cat, like you can't squeeze it too hard. It'll get really
But you
upset.
can try.
You can try and you will get scratched or something else will happen. And so, yeah, like when we become infatuated with the symbol of like the high priestess or the empress or the sun card, I think that it's again about having relationship with these components of psyche that is going to make our practice feel like it's living and breathing rather than just these like unfair expectations that we're projecting onto symbols. So
Yeah,
yeah.
totally.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking up this quote that Jung has. It's so, I love to kind of bring in so much. So Jung says that the world of gods and spirits is truly nothing but the collective unconscious within me.
Mm.
And I think that that's a really good way of putting it, because the gods and spirits out there and the planets are truly nothing but the lived experience, the collective within me. But at the same time, that does not mean that we can treat them as ours. And I think that that's the really, really important thing to think about whenever we're talking about any kind of archetypal, modality that we're working with. And especially a divinatory modality. This is, we're going to go into a whole nother 10-hour tangent if we go here. But I always tell people that the oracle is not there to solve your life. You are approaching the oracle, and there is a necessary experience of reverence when you do that, and respect, and not demanding that it give you all the answers you want, so that you can release the tension of living itself. None of us get that. So I think that while we can know that these things exist within ourselves, that what we were trying to contact is the deeper experiences of our being, at the same time, these are ancient things that have existed beyond you, before you, and after you. And so they are not yours to hold and squeeze and possess. So that is my spiel.
I think that that's very wise. And I think that with that said, maybe it's time for us to turn to the symbol that was submitted by a
Yes, let's
listener.
do it. If you're enjoying this podcast, we encourage you to learn more about how you can support us on Patreon. There's many benefits available, including extended episodes, guided tarot meditations, and astrology transit journals. But all listeners are welcome to share a symbolic experience for us to explore on the show.
Therefore, we invite listeners to pull those symbols from their lives, whether they come from a dream or synchronicity.
Thank you to today's sharer, and please tell us your symbolic experience on our website, sorormysticapodcast.com. New Age Boutique is an online metaphysical store that offers a variety of gift ideas or personal treasures that range from crystal candles and bath salts to spell jars and keychains. Everything is handmade with love and good intentions from St. Paul, Minnesota. For more information, you can follow them on Instagram at whole_heart or on Etsy at newageboutikemn.etsy.com. And I went and checked out this store. It looks absolutely so sweet, so delightful. So please go check them out and support this small business.
Are you a small business looking to reach a targeted audience of people who are interested in things like spirituality, esoterica, obscure academia, holistic living, magic, the occult, or other related topics? If this sounds like you, Soror Mystica would love to invite you to become an advertiser on our show. As Soror Mystica has a highly tailored audience of mindful, curious, depth-seeking listeners, we would be delighted to be able to give your business a place to reach new eyes, new ears, and new hearts. If you're interested in becoming an advertiser, you can find our application form at our website, which is sorormysticapodcast.com/advertise with us. Thank you so much for being a part of our listener community, and we really look forward to hearing more about your unique business quite soon.
Tangerine Sage Healing is a serene capsule for Reiki healing and gentle intuitive guidance for those who are seeking relief and newfound inspiration. Founder and Reiki master Stephanie Curtis offers an array of different in-person and distance Reiki healings for realignment and revitalization. Feel free to discover more about Tangerine Sage Healing or book a session by going to tangerinesagehealing.com or visiting Tangerine Sage Healing on Instagram. And I can personally vouch for Stephanie. She has given me Reiki many times and is so good at what she does. So go check out tangerinesagehealing.com.
So I have it open over here, so I'm happy to read it for us.
Please do.
Okay, so this symbol comes to us, and it is on the topic of Persephone. And so this is obviously a relevant symbol for you as Persephone's
Yes.
sister in many ways. But
Mhm.
I'll read what.
That is, by the way, for people who don't know, the reason I use Persephone's sister is because my sister's name is Persephone.
It's
It's really not
extremely.
that exciting.
Well,
And she was always a lot more popular than I was, so I was often in my childhood just known as Persephone's sister, and so that was just my other name that
it's so
stuck. So
interesting. It's so
yeah.
funny. Oh my God. So here is what our listener writes to us. I've always been really obsessed with the Persephone myth, and one of my favorite books as a child was a retelling by Margaret Hodges. I have not found that book, but I'm interested now.
Me too.
I have a deep love for stories of forbidden love and captured princesses, which can be a bit embarrassing as a feminist. But recently, I had an astrology reading where my astrologer noticed that my north node was conjunct Pluto, my south node was conjunct Ceres, and out of curiosity, we discovered that the Persephone asteroid is conjunct my sun. I'm also an Aries and always felt as a child like Persephone was mine because I was born in the spring and my mom is a Virgo, born during the harvest. I would love to hear more about what archetypes Persephone relates to and what that might mean for my own mythic journey. Such a great little
So
description.
good.
Mhm.
So good. This like literally proves your entire theory.
I
It's
know.
just so
I
wonderful.
know. It's real. Yes, totally.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, can I talk
Mhm.
about that, I guess, to get us started? And
Yeah,
then
yeah, please. Absolutely.
right. So, what our listener is describing with the positions of noticing planets and asteroids in the natal chart is it's a component of my practice where for any given myth or story, we can identify there's usually an asteroid named for a figure or two or even three of an important mythological tale in the Greco-Roman canon. So, in the Persephone myth, Persephone is a maiden. Her mother is Ceres. She is abducted by Pluto, taken to the underworld to be his unwilling bride. And in the course of living there with him and her mother searching desperately for her in the day world, she eventually winds up becoming the queen of hell. And so the
Mhm.
maiden transforms into this sort of more chthonic, nighttime oriented, really dark feminine figure. And we have a huge story over, or rather about coming, I think, into terms of accepting shadow and
Mm.
really individuating away from the matrix, from the mother origin, and what that means. And so, figures in that story are going to be Persephone, Pluto, Ceres. I would also throw in Hecate because she is involved in the discovery
Yeah.
and search for Persephone. Hermes or Mercury is also relevant to that tale as well because he and Hecate go down into the underworld to negotiate the return of Persephone. And so this is a way of saying we can find a constellation of asteroids in the chart and kind of name them as a particular psychological complex or experience and see how we relate to these topics. So, for this person to have Pluto on their north node, Ceres on their south node, and then Persephone on their sun, to me, that's fascinating because it's almost a sense of just fatedly being tuned into the figures of that story, the north and
It
south node.
literally is the
It's
story.
literally it, right? So you
Yeah, it's
as the
wild.
the solar Persephone figure, I would say that Persephone is a daimonic guide or a daimonic ally for
Yeah.
you in your own sense of individuality because she's conjunct your sun. Super, super interesting. So I would work
Yeah.
directly with Persephone ritually in dream work, meditation, and anything that feels relevant to you. And
Mhm.
particularly when aspects are being made to your sun, maybe from the sun in transit, check out where the Persephone asteroid is in transit. That can help you time ritual work with that asteroid. And then the polarity of Ceres and Pluto is the dark masculine. I think that Ceres is kind of a dark feminine figure.
She
She's
can be, certainly,
so
yeah.
much about,
I mean, she started winter
yes,
in
exactly.
rebellion
Exactly.
for losing her daughter, yeah.
Out of grief, she gave us our first winter and caused a lot
Yeah.
of trouble for humans, right? So, thinking about how on the north and south node we have this experience of not discarding the south node and reaching for the north node entirely, we have to blend and merge the story of the north and south node signs and symbols together. So what signs are your north and south node in? How does Ceres help you understand the archetypal meaning of your south node? How does Pluto help you understand the north? And where do those two meet? For me, it would be about day world consciousness and underworld consciousness blending together, the importance of nurturing the body and nurturing the soul coming together.
Yeah.
And then Persephone at the sort of, middle ground of that is the sort of material through which that transformation occurs. So that's kind of
totally
how I would see that archetypally playing out. And I would love to know what you see in this story.
Yeah, I mean, I would say if you were to like kind of bring a card in to like meditate on, it would certainly be the High Priestess. There's a couple things that tie her to Persephone. One, she is like the queen of this underworld space in terms of the underworld being the space of unconsciousness and deeper wisdom, right? So she very much has that depth to her. But also the High Priestess, in the traditional Rider-Waite image, her curtain behind her is covered in pomegranates. So it's like a direct correlation to the High Priestess kind of being connected to that, chthonic Persephone vision.
Because Persephone
right?
ate a pomegranate. She ate 6 pomegranate seeds
Right.
while she was in the underworld. And so I think that Zeus was like, Persephone can come back, but did she eat any food in the underworld? And this is a lesson. Don't eat any fairy food. Don't eat food in dreams.
Don't eat fairy food.
Don't eat things given to you in liminal spaces because you will get trapped.
Never. That is the lesson, 100%.
Yeah.
If anybody's had a dream about eating any food in the underworld, please tell us. I would love to hear about it. But yeah, I think that what that side of the High Priestess is really about is the archetypal virgin. And this is one of the terms that we get like, virgin, no thank you, don't talk to me about that, because that's so patriarchally, defined. But when we're talking about it as an archetype, it is not about whether she has had sex or not. It's about her relationship to others, relationship to a family or a partner or anything. The virgin is the autonomous, self-sufficient, independent archetype of femininity. So I think all of this, that would be a very beautiful card to pull in and meditate on and do some research about how the High Priestess can connect to Persephone. But certainly, reflecting on that archetype of the virgin. There's no shame in loving princess mythology. I have wanted to be a princess since I was 3 years old, and I will not give it up. My aunt at my wedding, literally, she's like, I'm going to give a speech. And everyone's like, really? Oh, okay. Interesting. Because like, I don't really like talk to her that often. And she took the mic and she said, from the time that she was a little girl, Mariana has always wanted to be a princess. And then gave the mic back to the to the person. That's all she said. And I was left like for hours. I was not even present for my wedding. I was just like, what did that mean?
Oh my God.
What did that mean?
She just wanted to say that. Maybe she panicked. That's so weird.
I still don't know what that meant at all, but whatever. Anyway,
that's so funny.
Don't worry. You can be a feminist and want to be a princess at the same time, because it's not about losing your power. It's about owning your autonomy and independence. That's really what it's trying to say underneath everything, and having some grace and beauty while you do it. That's usually what we associate with it, and that's okay too.
I think also on the note of like the abducted princess and feminism, like there are all kinds of ways of discovering agency and discovering self. And I think that there's a lot of, maybe this sounds kind of like BDSM-y, but like I think there's a lot of like wisdom to be, no, sorry, maybe this sounds too extreme, but I think that there's wisdom to be found in the experience of being overpowered and losing agency temporarily and surrendering to something heavier and darker and bigger than you. And like, I just, that's where I was going with that thought.
The rape of Persephone, we cannot forget that rape is part of it. Obviously, that's not to say any of us want that. That's not the intention. But, it is a myth that we connect to the animus a lot, the overpowering of the masculine within us, right? Taking away our agency. That is a very big part of it, and it's not something that we can deny having archetypal resonance within all of us. But let's not get too BDSM-y because we really could.
Sorry, I know it's early. I don't know why I took it there, but here we are.
One day. Anyway, I think that's a good place to kind of pull us back into the day world, out of the underworld. I also want to say, if you are interested in doing any of this work with noticing the tarot cards that you pull and noticing the transits, if you want to have the transits all lined up for you to see them in advance, we actually offer that on our Patreon, right?
This is true. Yeah, we have little offerings for those who are so generous to support us on Patreon. And my component of that is this monthly transit journal, where we have space for all of the important dates of the month ahead, descriptions of the full and new moon, ritual support, tools, right up on the lunations, and then a lot of like journaling space and questions for cultivating awareness. So yeah,
it's all there for you pre-prepped, which is great. And then for my part of it, I offer a monthly meditation on a tarot card that I pull at the beginning of the month. And and then like a little journal space as well to reflect on that consciously. So there's some juicy offerings there. And thank you for joining our wild, weird, surprising conversation today.
Thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us in our conversation today.
Please consider supporting the podcast by leaving a review and following Soror Mystica wherever you listen.
You can also become a more active supporter and a member of the Soror Mystica community by joining our Patreon.
If you have a symbolic experience that you'd like to share with us for the podcast, you can tell us all about it at sorormysticapodcast.com.
The music for this podcast is written and performed by me, Mariana Lewis, with special thanks to Stefan Lewis. You can connect with both Cristina and myself on Instagram and get to know our work by clicking on the links in the show notes.
As the alchemical motto goes, as above, so below, as within, so without.
May this ancient wisdom continue to guide you deeper.
Until next time, take good care.